And I'm going to introduce Mr. Carl Bradtmiller, community educator of Ghisallo Cycling Initiative. He graduated from McAllister College in St. Paul. He does excellent work with youth and young adults in educating them on cycle safety and in helping them get around and navigate in the cities, to the parks, to the pools, friends' houses, to school. And the part that I found real amazing was that Ghisallo does these bike clubs, bike shops, bike skill challenges, free safety clinics, educating the youth on how to use their bikes, maintain their bikes. And Carl, before I give it over to you, when I used to see these bike rodeos and grew up in San Antonio, it was the SAPD that did the rodeos. Do SAPD and Austin PD assist with these rodeos these days?
They do, yeah. They do help out some of the schools with traditional bike rodeos still, and I could talk a little bit more about that, but yeah, they're still around. The the traditional model for the bike rodeos is kind of having the students bring their bikes, bring their own equipment to schools, which sometimes, depending on what schools, what parts of town you're talking about, doesn't necessarily lead to really high rates of participation. And so that's kind of where our model comes in, because we're actually able to go to those schools and those community sites and places where kids are, but we are able to bring all the equipment with us. So whether or not you have a bike, or whether or not you can bring a bike from your home or from your apartment, you still get to participate and have that hands-on riding experience.
Fantastic. I know I kind of grew up in a rough neighborhood in San Antonio, and the relationships between the police officers and the youth groups in the neighborhood weren't the best. And this was one of the events where those two came together and actually had fun. And a lot of the kids that I grew up started respecting the police officers when the officers helped them with their bikes. So one more slide. Introducing Carl. I just think it's a fantastic job they do at helping the communities understand biking safety. So Carl, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to let you share.
Sounds good. I think you got to click me over to the permission so I can get my share screen up.
Okay. Are you registered under Ghisallo? Make a presenter. Did that do it?
Let's see. Maybe. Oh, it's going.
Hi. No, that sent it to the second half of Ghisallo.
Okay, so I'm
Try
going
Carl
to
Bradtmiller.
meeting options. Who can present? I'm going to make it everyone. Okay, Carl, now do you have the ability to present?
I got it here. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, Larry, for that introduction. Like Larry said, my name is Carl Bradtmiller, and I work with Ghisallo Cycling Initiative. Also here joining us on the call is my coworker, Christina, who is going to be sort of monitoring the chat. And if anybody has any questions while we're going along, please feel free to put those in the chat, and Christina can help out with those. And also here with us, who already introduced himself, is Efren, who is a great community partner from Bikeworld. He didn't really give himself enough credit. He does a lot of the community outreach things for Bikeworld as well, in addition to running the shop over there at the Pearl. And Bikeworld is a great partner for us in that they, have been in San Antonio for 50 years, over 50 years now, and so have a real strong foothold in terms of being able to, get a safety message out to all the riders and all the different community members that come in there through that shop. So definitely want to say thanks and give a shout out to Efren and Christina. And Also say thanks to Larry. So a little bit of origin story. Larry and Christina and Efren, or Christina, Efren, and myself met Larry at a UPS driver safety event, and we talked a little while there. This was pre-COVID, and we're glad to be able to connect today to talk to everybody that's on the call. And it's a little different kind of audience than a lot of our normal presentations, which are often kind of about riding for riders. And today we're going to focus a little bit more on, on cycling for drivers, right? What to do if you're a driver and you come across cyclists on the road, as I'm sure most of you have, and also kind of things to focus on from the point of view of a safety professional. If you're managing fleets, if you're doing insurance, what are the risk profiles for some of these different, some of the different elements of cycling, and how do the laws kind of factor into that? So quick little brief rundown on our organization. Like Larry said, our organization gets grants to enable bike programs of all different kinds. We used to kind of have a strong youth focus, although now we have programs for all ages and abilities. We still do a lot of youth-focused stuff, although we also have, adult programs, as well as senior programs. We have some senior riding programs that focus on trikes instead of bikes and different things. So that's kind of our vision. And so we want to break down the barriers that prevent people from being able to use their bikes to do the things that they're going to do anyway. So, especially for kids, being able to, ride the bike to the pool, ride the bike to the friend's house, ride the bike to the park. Those are the kinds of things that we want to help facilitate. So this is kind of what we're going to sort of go over today. We had some introductions. I got some traffic data. There's a lot of data in traffic safety, and I'm going to share some of that with you today. We're going to talk a little bit about some philosophies and strategies about road safety. We're going to look at the applicable laws for Texas and different municipalities. We're going to look at some common facilities and the infrastructure component. We're going to look at some common crash scenarios, and then kind of bring it back with what to expect when you see cyclists on the road. So diving right in, Larry was talking a little bit about crash data and vehicle fatalities, and that's what this slide is. And this is a real interesting slide. And what we have here are about the last 10 years, and this is actually the percent change in terms of total crashes and total fatalities, right? And so you have in any given year, set number of crashes, and then some percentage of those crashes are gonna result in fatalities. Typically, those are gonna kind of go up and down with each other. As there are more crashes, there will be more fatalities, and vice versa. And so we can kind of see the normal trend lines; those sort of stick together. But what we can see in 2020 was a very, very sharp divergence, where we have the light blue, which is the fatalities, and that actually went up over the year before that, about 7 or 8%, even though the total number of crashes was down about 15%. And this is something that, for those of you who work in traffic safety, you may already be familiar with this. But what it meant was that there were a lot less people driving. The other sort of thing that this trends with is VMT, vehicle miles traveled. You can see these usually pair off pretty well. Vehicle miles traveled was way, way down as well, kind of in line with the total crashes. But the driver behavior during that time was a lot higher speed, higher incidence of stress and other, drinking and driving and different things that are going to, increase the incidence of crashes. And part of this, as we'll see, was vulnerable road users. And what we mean by vulnerable road users are people that are walking and biking, people that are not inside a car. And so that's really what we're going to see, is that cars for people that are riding in cars, cars are getting safer and safer every year, and fatality rates for people that get into a crash that are in a vehicle are steadily declining as a result of a lot of these mitigation factors. But for pedestrians, as our next slide shows here, the incidence of bike and pedestrian fatality is increasing, and we got a couple different different lines on here. The top one is the bike and pedestrian percentage of total fatalities. So in 2020, there were just short of 4,000 fatalities in Texas, and about 21% of those were bike and pedestrians. That is up, as we can see, about 5% or thereabouts. It was trending in just about 15%, and we've had an uptick of that, and it went up sharply in 2020 as well. And then the other line on here is the percentage of bike and pedestrian crashes that result in a fatality. And we can also see that ticked up sharply in 2020 as well. And that's really where a big slice of that, we saw that upward trend in fatalities. In a large slice of those fatalities that are happening, we talk about motor vehicle fatalities. Sort of thing that comes into somebody's mind is somebody that gets in a crash and they, are in their car and they die. But a huge proportion of deaths that happen that are motor vehicle deaths are bike and pedestrians, and so those are people that are not inside the vehicle. And so that it just goes to show that the environment with the safety features in modern cars, like I was saying, for people in the vehicle continues to be safer, but with higher speeds, it continues to be a dangerous environment for pedestrians and cyclists. And actually, the total number of fatalities last year for all users, all modes, was as high as it's been since 1982, which was a little nugget I was interested to find out when I was doing some research for this presentation. So, despite having VMT way down and having crashes way down, the fatalities are still way up. So something to keep in mind as you're talking to drivers and as you're talking to employees and things, that really the time to be driving defensively and employing these strategies is right now. So moving on, this is just to kind of give us a frame of reference for what we're going to be kind of talking about today. These 4 ideas are things that we're going to come back to a lot, and just kind of setting them out here, and then we'll circle back to them a little bit. And predictability, following the law, being seen, visibility, and kind of always planning ahead are the key elements that are going to let us kind of get where we're going safely, let everybody else get where they're going safely. Traffic is it presents a lot of interesting safety challenges because the risk profile changes all the time, and it doesn't only change with what you're doing. And in a lot of instances, I think a lot of people on this call, are safety managers and things that a lot of industries, you have a point person that's kind of responsible, at least from a top-down way, for the safety of everybody. And traffic is a very different model, right? Because we're only responsible for what we're doing, but there are, usually a lot of other people out sharing the road with us. And so being able to kind of keep these strategies in mind all the time is really the challenge of driving. And if you're doing this, there's not a lot of room to do anything else. And I think that's one of the reasons why we see the number of accidents and things that we do. So we're gonna circle back to these, but just kind of keep these in mind, and we're gonna be touching back on them later. So first, we're going to talk about some laws, and we're going to then think about those key kind of safety behaviors as they relate to these laws. So first things first, bikes on a road are considered motor vehicles. And I guess just at the outset, none of these are a matter of opinion, and it's not these all come from the Texas Transportation Code. And so the way that people feel when they encounter a cyclist on the road may be different from what what rights that the law accords them. And so, we're hopeful that this presentation will kind of be able to iron out some of those wrinkles. But bikes on the road are motor vehicles, right? So that means that a bike has to ride with the flow of traffic and must obey all stop signs and signals, right? And these are some of the main things that we try to work with cyclists about. Because sometimes we'll see riders riding against the flow of traffic, right? And when I'm on my bike or when I'm in a car and I see a rider riding against the flow of traffic, all I think is, man, that's a really dangerous situation. And, I hope that that person gets where they're going safely, because when you're riding against the flow of traffic, that's not very predictable behavior, right? So that is going to go against kind of one of those main touchdowns that we talked about. Similarly, stopping at all traffic signs and signals. You expect a car to stop at a red light, and you got to expect a bike to stop at a green light, at a red light too. And, getting that message out to riders is definitely something that that's important to us. And it's the very first thing, bikes ride with the flow of traffic and have to obey all the traffic signals. So moving on, the Texas bike laws also state that a bike rider shall ride as near as practicable to the right curb, not as near as practical. The word in the law is practicable, which is mouthful. And basically it means as far to the right as you can. And anybody that's driven on any roads here in San Antonio knows that the road condition can vary, quite a bit. And so that doesn't always mean next to the curb, right? It's as near as is practicable. And this same law actually offers several exceptions to the times that you have to do that, right? If you're passing another vehicle, if you're preparing to turn left, if there's a surface hazard, so, a pothole, glass, something in the road that you're not able to ride over, or if the lane is too narrow for a bicycle and a motor vehicle to safely travel side by side. So the point of this is that bikes do have to ride on the right side of the road, although there are a lot of exceptions that come with that. And there are a lot of times when, as a driver, you should expect that you will see a bike that's in the main travel lane. And so we're going to keep keep talking about that here in just a minute. More tidbits in the Texas Transportation Code. People on bikes are allowed to ride two abreast in the same lane. This is something that you see like, oh, we got single file, or, you hear about cars yelling at riders riding side by side. It's perfectly legal. Again, not a matter of opinion, whether or not, you got somewhere to go, or if you think that a rider should be there, they have a right to be there, just like somebody driving the combine over to the next field has a right to be there. You got the horse carriages in downtown San Antonio taking tourists out for a walk. I can ride my bike a lot faster than the horse carriages, but they're also, allowed to be there in the lane of traffic. And if you get behind a horse carriage, the behavior of people you don't expect to just honk on your horn and have the horse carriage move out of your way. You just sit there and, wait for it to go. So people in bikes are allowed to ride two abreast in the same lane. Also in here, a front light and a rear light or a rear reflector is required by law for riding after dark. So just like cars, there are a lot of rights and a lot of responsibilities for riders. They're equal part. You have to do your part to make the traffic system on the whole work in terms of those things that we talked about, following the law, being predictable. And then you also are going to be able to, make use of the road space like a motor vehicle. So the kinds of facilities that we have in our cities can tell us a lot about what to expect in terms of cyclists. And so this is sort of the next now that we know a little bit about the law, we can kind of look at some of these different facilities and kind of think about how does the usage of these facilities fit in with what we now know about where bikes may ride, right? And so we have a couple different examples here. And the first one here, we have this nice protected two-way bikeway. We've got a couple of those in San Antonio. And again, if these are, if you're living out in, outside of San Antonio in a rural area, these may not be facilities that you encounter as often, but especially in more densely populated area, you'll see things like this. And it's good to know what to kind of expect. So protected two-way bikeway, these are great because there's no cars, right? I can tell you from being a rider myself, given the opportunity to ride on a facility that's bike only, I will do it every time. It's great. Riders a lot of times don't ride on the roads because they want to. They ride on the roads because that's the way to get where they're going. And so, protected two-way bikeway is a great thing to have in a city because it gives cyclists a space that's separate from drivers, right? And if you were driving on that street, you might expect that there would be cyclists in the area, right? Because it's a busy enough, I should say, populated enough with cyclists that it has its own infrastructure. And although they may not be sharing the road with you at that point in time, you could expect as a driver that you might see a cyclist that was going to that path or leaving that path and going down a different road, right? So it would still be a situation where you would want to be watchful and mindful as a driver for other kinds of pedestrians, as opposed to a situation, say, where you're driving down a FM, whatever, out somewhere in East Texas and there's nobody around. You would probably not have the same expectation to see a driver as you would in the middle of a city next to a protected bikeway. So similarly, a basic bike lane, if you're driving along in San Antonio and you're on a street with a bike lane, you should probably be vigilant and looking around that you may see a cyclist, right? Even though they have their own piece of infrastructure right there, because there's a bike lane, it's very likely that you'll encounter cyclists. Hopefully, you'll both have your own slice of the pie, and the rider will stay in the bike lane, and the car can drive in the road. But there may be instances where the rider would not be in the bike lane, right? If they're turning left or going around a big stick in the road or something. So, and then the last picture on here is something called a sharrow. And this is something that a lot of people see and they don't know what it is. And so if you don't know what it is, I won't make you put your hand up. But what these types of road markings, they have a name, and it's called a sharrow, which is a combination of share and arrow. And basically all it means is that it's a designation to drivers that this is a low speed, bike friendly street where you should expect to see a cyclist. That's also usually narrow. If there were real estate, a lot of roads end up as sharrows because there's simply not width of the right of way to put in a bike lane. But it's a street where that's frequented by riders, or that traffic engineers want to let drivers know that they should expect to see cyclists. They'll paint them with a sharrow, and a sharrow is different than a bike lane, but it kind of carries that same expectation that you can expect to see a rider there, and they may be sharing the lane of traffic with you. So putting these all together, there's all these different kinds of roads. We've got different riding scenarios. So where are bikes supposed to ride, right? If we can ask just sort of a general question, where are bikes supposed to ride? There is really no one good answer. And we can kind of go back and we can start to piece this together again with our sort of four main tenets of road safety. And we can sort of look at these and talk about it a little bit. Your position on the road, whether or not you choose to ride in the bike lane or you choose to ride in the middle of the lane, your position is key to being visible and to being predictable. So two of those four things, where you are makes a huge determination about what other people are going to expect from you and whether or not they can even see you, right? Visibility issues exist for drivers in the same way. Anybody that drives an 18-wheeler knows that you got a big blind spot behind the 18-wheeler. And there's obviously, a lot of new electronic technology with newer cars for blind spot, recognition and different things. And so with a bike, it's the same idea. There are a lot of places on a bike where you're less visible to cars. And, the further over in the lane that you are, sometimes you can be less visible as well. So vehicle position allows other users to predict behavior, right? You ever had somebody, turn left out of the straight lane at an intersection, or, do these other things where the car, you expect based on where the car is that it's going to do one thing, or the bike, and then it does another thing. So that's why this positioning conversation is super important, because it's really the first step in kind of letting other road users know what we're going to do. And in that regard, thinking of bikes as vehicles, right? That was the first thing. We know that bikes are vehicles according to the law. We don't have any choice. The law won't let me be a pedestrian on my bike. So I have to be a vehicle. And so since I have to be a vehicle on my bike, then the best thing for me to do is act like a vehicle. Vehicles use the lane of traffic. So on my bike, I'm going to use the lane of traffic too. And when the safest place for a rider is in the middle of the lane, we sometimes will call that taking the lane. And it's basically just an acknowledgement that you have a right to the space on the road that you need to operate safely. And that, you're confident in taking that space. And then when, you need to make a turn or get out of the way, then you'll have that expectation. So I should say at the outset, or at this point, that these are that what I'm describing here are kind of like advanced strategies that we would talk to adults about. And in terms of the specifics of teaching, kids complex traffic situations, their capacity for understanding those complex situations is going to kind of change as they get older. And so we're not going to teach a 6-year-old to ride in the middle of the lane of traffic, but we are going to begin to teach them some of the nuances and complexities that come with complex traffic situations, so that they can think about those and they can, have a slow drip of that education over a number of years before up until the point where they're becoming a road user. And then at that time, they will have had some experience doing that. So where am I supposed to ride? Wherever the bike needs to ride to operate safely. Getting back to that, reasons that a rider may take the lane. So we know that we need to ride as far to the right as is practicable. But can we ride on the right all the time? No. What if I need to make a left turn to go to my house? So there are lots of reasons that you may leave the very right-hand curb or the bike lane. So now we can kind of talk about what some of those reasons are. One, you want to be seen. Being seen, it's easier to see something that's in front of you. So if I'm a rider and I'm worried that it might be hard for a vehicle behind me to see me, then being in their field of view is going to increase my visibility. Preparing for a left turn, right? If I turn quickly and dangerously from the far right lane to the left lane, cutting across a lane or maybe two of traffic, that's not going to be, safe or predictable maneuver. So in order to get ready for a left turn, you're going to have to get into the lane of traffic, move over. Positioning in an intersection, we're going to talk about that just sort of next. And that's another really common reason that you'd be out of the immediate curb to prevent unsafe passing. This has happened to me as a rider, and plenty of times you have a car that is clearly itching to get around you. You know, as a rider, that there's not space for them because there's oncoming traffic or whatever. And instead of allowing a rider or allowing a driver to come past you in an unsafe manner, you can keep them behind you by not allowing anywhere to pass. And this is one, this is an instance, I think, when sometimes drivers may not understand the safety requirements of a cyclist, right? And it's really no one else's determination to make about whether or not it's safe. It's a safe instance to pass, other than the rider, given the fact that the rider has a right to use the lane, and they're going to be the vehicle in the front, right? So you can kind of compare it to any other slow-moving vehicle. Avoiding a car door, that's pretty common. Cars, there's often a parking lane, adjacent to a bike lane, but not with enough room where an opening door won't end up in the bike lane. So that's a common thing. If you see a car pull in and you see a rider, you can expect that rider may kind of get out of the way to avoid a car door. Debris in the road, we talked about that. Triggering automatic signals. There are definitely places around San Antonio where there are signals that will get triggered for things that are in the middle of the road that don't trigger for things on the side of the road. And then the last one on here, because it's the safest place to ride. So, really this list of reasons why a rider may take the lane, it's a long list. There are a lot of reasons. And on almost every bike ride that you go on, there will probably be a reason why you need to occupy the main lane of traffic, even for just a short period of time. Talking about this intersection positioning, and this is something that's really important for kind of fleet managers and things to understand as well as it relates to driver training. And this is something that we work a lot on with cyclists as well. And these slides actually are courtesy of the League of American Bicyclists. And they're good slides in that they illustrate some where you might find a bicyclist and why. And so on this first one, we have two options. We've got a straight and a right turn here from this lane. If this rider is going to continue straight, why would they be in the left lane or in the left third of the lane, would you think? The answer to that is that it prevents a car, if they're trying to squeeze over here and really be in their smallest possible footprint. A common crash scenario that we'll talk about here in a second is actually that a car would come and make a right turn into them while they're trying to continue straight through the intersection. That's what's called a right hook. But by positioning yourself in the left-hand third of this lane, you're kind of making sure that nobody's going to try to pass you until you get through that intersection. Similarly, you're going to want to position yourself in the left third of the lane if you're making a left turn, right? Because that's going to allow you the shortest distance till you can get back to the curb. Similarly here, you see the guy going straight. He's not going to be in the far right of the lane. They're going to be in the middle of the lane. And if you're turning right, you're going to go ahead and be in the right part of the lane. This illustrates one of the instances where a rider will need to cross over a lane or even two lanes of traffic to get into a lane that's going to serve where they need to go. So this rider is trying to go straight. They don't want to turn left. And so what they're going to need to do is they're going to need to cross over these lanes of traffic. And so that's just something that as a driver, vehicles need to change lanes in order to get to the lane that serves their destination. And it's the same thing for cyclists. So we just mentioned it a little bit, but some of these common crash scenarios, these are probably things that, that hopefully the drivers on this call are familiar with, the fleet managers. These are pretty common scenarios that do get covered, fortunately, in a lot of driver training. But the two biggest ones are the left hook and the right hook. Here's the scenario that we were sort of just talking about, where you have a bike lane and you have a cyclist traveling straight in this direction of travel, and the car is going to try to come past them and turn into them while they're continuing straight. That can often be a question of visibility, right? And so this is an instance where if this rider had been in front of this vehicle and had gone across the intersection in the travel lane, there's a chance that the driver of the red car would not have had the opportunity to cut in front of the cyclist. And that is, in a nutshell, the best illustration of of why a rider would need to take that space instead of hope that that space would be granted, right? Because in the one instance, it's in your control, and in the other instance, it's not in your control. The left hook is a similar situation where the rider's continuing straight across and the car turns in front of them. And the left hook is often a question of visibility, or a question of the driver of the blue car misjudging the speed or the field of view of the rider. And so here we can see the blue lines on this slide indicate the field of view for the blue car, and the blue car is looking for breaks in traffic. The blue car is waiting to watch for other vehicles that are coming into the intersection to see when they can turn. They're not looking for a slower moving vehicle that's already maybe into the intersection. And so as a rider, we teach cyclists that this is a time, to make sure that you have high visibility clothes, lights, even daytime running lights. Now the technology for rechargeable bike lights is excellent, and for a relatively small amount of money, you can pretty much have a really, really bright rechargeable light on your bike that's bright enough to see at high noon. Although this sort of crash mode does bear a lot of responsibility on oncoming drivers, just making sure that they're watching out for all modes, not just watching for people, for cars coming into this intersection, also watching for pedestrians that are crossing the street here. Pedestrians in this right side crosswalk would also be common targets for both of these crash modes. Making eye contact is the last thing that's on here. As a rider, that's something you always try to do. As a driver, it really just is the point at which everybody can say, okay, I feel good, that person saw me, I saw them. There's acknowledgement about what we can expect, and everybody's going to get where they're going. I will say another mode. So the other mode that we see, this right hook, it's not represented on this slide actually, is in the case of a cyclist riding in the wrong direction. And if you have a cyclist coming here the wrong way down the street that the red car is turning into, then that's also going to be a common crash mode for hitting a wrong way cyclist. So now we'll get into some of the other laws around cycling. So statewide, there is no specified distance at which a driver must pass a vulnerable road user, like a bike or a pedestrian. Although the Texas Transportation Code specifies that you have to pass someone at a safe distance, but since that safe distance isn't enumerated, that law is all but unenforceable, and it's there's no real action that's available for anybody who feels that that's been violated. Over 20 Texas cities have adopted local safe passing ordinances. And so this is another thing, as fleet managers and as the people that are ultimately responsible for the safety of drivers, it's important to know the different laws of different municipalities. Both Austin and San Antonio have what are called safe passing laws, which specify that cars and private vehicles have to allow 3 feet when they're passing, horses, tow trucks, wheelchairs, bikes, motorcycles, construction workers, tractors, pedestrians, any kind of, quote, vulnerable road user. And that's actually what these are called, our vulnerable road user laws, sometimes sort of safe passing in quotes. And then the component to that a lot of people are less familiar with, which is again going to be important for a lot of folks on the call, is that there is a requirement for a lot of these safe passing laws for commercial vehicles that pass at a distance of 6 feet. And that's going to include box trucks. It's going to, obviously include semis and things like that. But, I believe even, even pickups and things that are out for commercial duty are going to have that regulation for 6 feet, and that's true in Austin and San Antonio. And I was really pleased to hear that we had somebody joining us from Houston who logged on just to hear this call, and I was scrambling to look up the Houston safe passing law because I didn't have any information about it, and it actually has a trailing requirement that you can't trail closer than 6 feet, but it does not have the similar 6 foot for commercial sort of clause in there like the Houston and San Antonio ones do. So, or like the Austin and San Antonio. So in Houston, you need to give 3 feet for everybody. In Austin and San Antonio, it's 3 feet and 6 feet for commercial vehicles. But that's going to change based on where your drivers are, And so if you're in Balcones Heights and then you come into San Antonio, that law is going to be in effect, and whereas it might not have been in effect where you were coming from. And again, this is something that it's a difficult thing to kind of gauge and assess, right? So how do you know if you're 6 feet away, what strategies are there to be able to kind of get data around that? We actually have a device, and there is a device which is produced. It's called a C3 Feet, which is a device that's designed to attach to the handlebar of a bike, and it uses infrared in order to detect the distance of a passing vehicle. And so we've done some trainings before with bus drivers and things like that, but that's something that is not something that we do every day. But if you're interested in checking out the C3 Feet for using that for any fleet safety stuff, please get in touch with us and we can talk a little bit more about that. But it'll show you, to the inch how far away a vehicle is, so you can kind of get drivers a little bit of perspective to say, oh well, it felt like I was 6 feet away, but really you were only 2 feet away, and then you can actually get some hard data around that. So safe passing, it's a city by city ordinance. There was a House bill and a Senate bill this year, this term for the legislature, neither of which got called up. But it's something that people have put it forth to get passed into state law, and it hasn't quite made it. But we're still hopeful that we'll get a Texas-wide safe passing law here before too long. So speaking of passing, what should you do if you're passing a cyclist? Treat bicyclists like any other slow-moving vehicle, right? Just like we talked about, sometimes the expectation of drivers is a little different because I think the size of the bicycle, is relatively small. So they feel like the bike should get out of the way because the bike is small and the car is big and the car goes fast and the bike goes slow. But again, think to yourself, what would I do now if this was a tractor? What would I do right now if this was a horse carriage? And that's usually going to be your best mode, your best decision to make for a cyclist as well. I know it can be hard, but if there's not space to pass, you just have to slow down and wait to pass until traffic clears. Part of the thing that we try to focus on with drivers is just trying to get people to understand that element of vulnerability, right? Which kind of bubbled up a little bit in those stats where we kind of can come to realize that it's so much more dangerous, statistically speaking, for people that are even just walking on a sidewalk next to a road, than for somebody in a motor vehicle. Like if there's a crash, the likelihood that the person that's outside of the vehicle is going to suffer some type of injury or fatality, is vastly higher than the car. And so kind of understanding that vulnerability from the road user perspective and just kind of having some empathy as a driver is really one of the best strategies to just say, you know what, you got to slow down and wait. That's a person. I'm a person. Everybody's trying to get where they're going. And I know that this is, preaching somewhat to the choir here with the safety professionals, but that's really one of the biggest messages that we try to get out to our non-cyclist clients, especially. Going down the list, I know everybody likes the the big Ram dualies and the F-350s and things. If you got a trailer, if you got the tow package, mirrors and things like that, give a little bit of extra room. If you got a big truck, just know that those can push a lot of air, especially box trucks and things. And that if you're close, if you have room, just give a little bit of extra room. And then obviously that right hook situation that we talked about, you want to avoid passing a rider. And then, the worst thing is somebody comes past you, they zoom past you, they slam on their brakes right in front of you, and then they turn right. And it's just, again, just wait a second. It'll save you about, cost you about 2 seconds and might keep somebody else alive. So putting it all together, what to expect. Again, a lot of things that we talked about, but what to expect, bikes are going to ride in the right lane. They should ride in the right lane. They should make space for people that are going faster than them. Those are all parts of being courteous. Should you expect a bike to stay in the right lane the entire time? Absolutely not. Lots of reasons, like we already talked about why cyclists would need to leave the rightmost portion of the lane. A real good tip for people, especially professional drivers, people that have a lot of experience and they're in tune to what's going on. Watching the behavior of cyclists is really going to clue you in a lot if you can start to recognize some of the clues and things that riders do in order to check their own environment. One of the skills that we do teach, even starting with our elementary school kids and all the way up, basically in all of our programs, is what we call scanning, which is teaching that ability for riders to, ride in one direction and then they're turning around and they're checking over their left shoulder to check for oncoming traffic, because that's the precursor typically to almost any of these, changes in lane position, or even just moving out of a bike lane to avoid, a bag of nails that fell off somebody's truck. Typically what you're going to do, the rider's going to look behind, you're going to see them turn their head like that, and then they're going to signal and they're going to make that move. So as a driver, if you start to kind of watch riders and if you see them looking around for their environment, you can interpret that as a sign that they may be preparing to change their position, right? This rider wants to turn left, the lane that they're in, go straight. So they're going to need to scan, signal, and then move over into the lane that's going to take them where they need to go. So there is one thing that we haven't, well, a couple things we haven't talked about yet. So talk about the last couple things here. Illegal courtesies. This is a tricky one. Sometimes people want to do bike riders a favor and they'll stop where they're not supposed to stop and let somebody go across the street, different things. We really try to discourage that. And for fleet drivers and things like that, it's best to just discourage it. It really goes against a lot of those elements of predictability, right? Because when you have motor vehicles that are kind of violating the order of operations, so to speak, then that introduces other kind of trickle down effects for the rider that driver may not anticipate. So if you see a bike rider and they're waiting to turn left and you're driving your car and you've got the right of way to go straight, then go straight. Drive, just treat the bike like they're a vehicle, and that'll typically be the best case scenario. I know some of you are thinking, well, I stopped there because I just wanted to make sure that they stop, and that's fine. But just know, don't stop and wave them through. You stop, they stop, then you go, and they go, just like something, just like with a vehicle. So riding on the sidewalk, I know I touched on that earlier, but I wanted to mention it too, because it's actually something where there's some variation in terms of the law, city by city. State of Texas Transportation Code says municipalities, says that riding on the sidewalk is not illegal unless it's illegal in your municipality. And it is illegal in San Antonio, actually, to ride your bike on the sidewalk. and even for kids. And so this is something where there's not, where it's kind of like there's a little bit of a disconnect between something that's the safest, option, and then something that's maybe sort of the most, what kind of makes the most sense. And for adults, we will generally discourage riding on the sidewalk because you don't expect to see vehicles on the sidewalk, right? Bikes are vehicles. Vehicles go on the road, and there are a lot of cases when bikes are not expecting to see vehicles. They drive right over that sidewalk, ready to stop at the driveway to look out, to check for cars and different things. And so, especially in terms of visibility, being a bike rider on a sidewalk is an extremely low visibility place to be. And the League of American Bicyclists don't recommend it. We don't recommend it. Although for kids, it's a lot of times the best place. In San Antonio, it's actually illegal, even for kids. That being said, is SAPD out writing a bunch of tickets to kids for riding their bike on the sidewalk? Probably not, but it just sort of is one of these things where we need to think about what space are we making available for people to, to get around and be active in ways that are not driving a car. So speed, I didn't, there's so much data on speed, and speed is such an important consideration. I didn't spend a lot of time on it here today. All of you, if you're in traffic safety at all, that speed is the single greatest risk factor as it relates to the severity of the outcome of different crashes, right? And you see this exponential, curve where as the speed goes up, the outcomes for fatality and serious injury just go way up. And the same thing is true, when you're driving around, you see people on their bikes, just slow down. That extra 5 miles an hour could probably be an extra 15, 20, 25% chance that somebody survives a crash. And obviously nobody, you're never getting out thinking that you're going to get into a crash, but keeping your speed at the speed limit and not going faster than you need to go, especially around kids, and the thing about it, you can be doing what you're supposed to do. Kids are unpredictable. And a lot of the bike accidents that happen with kids are as a result of kids doing something that, is against the law. And so, that's not predictable. And so like, if kids are violating those kind of tenets of predictability and law, then it's incumbent on the drivers to be in a position to be able to think ahead, right? Which was one of our other tenets, to kind of anticipate those things. And a lot of times that'll mean going a little slower, having your foot on the brake, not looking at your phone. Distracted driving is obviously, it gets covered so thoroughly. Didn't spend a lot of time on it today. But Texas is hands-free, so nobody should be on their phone. Parking in bike lanes, that's the last thing. If you got guys out there doing deliveries in box trucks and things like that, please do let them know. Don't park in the bike lanes. Don't put your blinkers on and just be there for a minute. Just got to run in and get a taco. When there's a truck or something in the bike lane, it's going to create another instance where a bike has to enter the travel lane. And statistically speaking, every time we are making a bike in a car, come together and utilize the same space, then we're introducing another chance for for potential crash. So there's probably one thing that you thought that you were going to get some of when you came to the bike safety presentation today, and you haven't gotten any of it. And so now here you go. Big letters, always wear a helmet. Doing so will greatly reduce the chance of serious injury or death in the event of crash. So you can say you went to the bike safety presentation and you heard all about how you should wear your bike helmet. And now here's the big but. It's not the most important thing about getting where you're going. And so that's really what we want to make sure that we're continuing this conversation about. And it's why, especially when we talk about adults, we're not focused on, the bike helmet thing first and foremost. It's not the first thing that we talk about because there's a lot that comes with getting where you're going. That's not about buckling your bike helmet, right? It's absolutely a key piece of, PPE to wear every time. It should just be habitual for every rider on every ride to get your helmet, click it on, you put your seatbelt on, and it's just automatic. You get in the car, you get where you're going, you unbuckle it, and your seatbelt never does a thing because you were doing steps 1 through 4 and you didn't use step 5. So this is kind of what we like to talk about, are that helmet's super important, but it's not a panacea as it relates to the problem of bike safety. And when we're talking about the behaviors that are going to prevent crashes and prevent injuries, wearing a helmet is not amongst the things that you're actually the active things to do to prevent a crash. And so these sorts of things, this is what we call the 5 layers of safety. And it's actually something that we borrowed from the League of American Bicyclists as well, but it's an important concept. And so we wanted to kind of bring it up because these all apply for drivers, motor vehicle drivers, as well as car drivers. The first basic thing, you just have to stay in control. Don't crash into anything, right? So that's a pretty low bar to entry for number 1. Number 2, obey the law, right? So stay in your lane, pay attention, keep your hands on the steering wheel. Positioning, discourage others' mistakes. So we talked a lot about this in terms of intersection positioning and riding. The same thing is going to be true of a motor vehicle driver. So there are, these parallels where even if you're not a cyclist, you can kind of see how these same ideas are going to apply. You may have learned when you're learning to drive, don't just sit in somebody's blind spot, right? You're going to pass them, go past them, then get back over into the lane, right? Because if you're there are certain places where you can be in a car or on a bike where you're going to be more vulnerable to other people's mistakes. So learning about where you need to position your car or you need to position your bike so that you're at the least risk. Number 4, avoidance, and be prepared to avoid others' mistakes. Like just like on all these things apply for cars as well as they do on bikes. You're driving on the highway, you see the guy, zooming on the on-ramp, he's already going 80 miles an hour. And, he starts cutting across one lane of traffic. I'm sure everybody's, seen something similar. It's like, well, I'm just going to go ahead and slow down because I know this guy is going to go ahead and cut across 2 more lanes of traffic, right? Because you can tell by the way that they're driving, and so you're just thinking ahead, you're watching around you. The same thing is true for riders. And so there are instances as a rider where, you're paying attention and you're thinking, man, I have the right of way here, but I can tell that car is not going to stop. And so I'm going to stop here because I'm ready to take action to avoid the mistake that someone else is going to make. And then finally, if you've done 1 and you've done 2 and you've done 3 and you've done 4 and you still get into a crash, then your helmet will be there, your seatbelt will be there, your gloves or whatever will be there to help you have a little bit of skin. And then hopefully you'll be able to go home at the end of the day because you put your bike helmet on. But all of those elements up into the point where you got into a crash are the things that we're trying to teach kids and adults in order to kind of be able to navigate those situations on their own and to understand that safety goes way beyond just put your helmet on or buckle up and then you're safe. It's an active thing that's constantly monitoring the environment on the road and making sure that you're keeping engaged and really watching out for what's going on. So final thoughts, and then we can get to some questions here if you have any. Number 1, bikes have a right to use the road. Everybody ride friendly. Treat bicyclists as drivers of vehicles. So expect them to do the same thing a car would do. And both road users, and that's supposed to say both road users and cyclists, can take action to avoid bike and car crashes. I I've seen myself, dangerous riding. I've seen myself dangerous driving. Everybody needs to meet in the middle, and understand that the traffic system is something we all have to work on together. Understanding different kinds of infrastructure and understanding where you can expect cyclists to be and why. Making sure that you're following safe passing distance, that you're aware of any local ordinances, and make sure you share the road, drive friendly, and all that. And that's what we got. So there are some links and some contact information here. I know Larry had the presentation, I believe, up on the website, and so these links are going to be on here. I actually just added this link for the C3 feet, which I was talking about, which is the safe passing enforcement device that we do have here in San Antonio. This has some other, just some other information about the laws and different things we've talked about today, as well as my information, and that for Christina and Efren. And so we can bring it back to any questions.
Hey, Carl, you did a fantastic job on that. I want to thank you and Christina and Efren for the presentation. I know I learned a lot and learned some new terms during that. And I think the information you presented was very important. I know as just myself as a kid growing up, a young snot-nosed kid riding like crazy on sidewalks and stuff like that, I had multiple people that would back out or pull out in front of me. And I just chalked it up to they were a bunch of old gray hairs and didn't know what they were doing. As I got a little older and started riding a motorcycle, 3 times I had to lay my motorcycle over, and that was the only option available. All 3 times when I asked the person why they pulled out in front of me or backed out in front of me, all 3 of them said, I have the right of way. And I thought, what an idiot. These drivers do not know that motorcycles and bicycles have the same rules. So I would like to see the Texas Department of Public Safety do a better job of educating drivers on that. Cycles do have the same rights as the car. So I think your presentation did a good job of that. I also want to thank Christina, because all through your conversation there was chats popping up, and I think it was her answering the questions. Fantastic job. Does anybody else have questions out there? If not, then Carl, Christina, Efren, I really appreciate you taking the time today to educate us. Thank you so much. And as you stated, I will get this posted up to the site. And with that, we'll end today's meeting. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Larry.
you.
Thank you.
I'll take care.